actual AI projects in the real world. So this is an interesting one, and I kind of think about Copilot especially, but AI in general. What we see across organizations is there's kind of two approaches to way an organization will roll out AI. One is what we call user enablement. So that's where we just give everyone AI licenses and we say, kind of go ahead and start to use it to automate some of your daily activities, whether it's sending better emails or drafting better documents and things like that, right? So there's the user enablement layer. But then we also have these business processes where we can start to leverage some AI. And we're getting quite a few requests for that type of project. So I thought it's probably a good opportunity to jump in and we'll start talking about what potentially some of those AI projects could be. But don't think so much on the actual specifics of the project, just think about the concept of the project and we'll try and cover some of those things. But we call that bottom up, right? So top down is just you say, okay, well, we're going to broadly give everyone licenses and we're going to train the users, so user enablement. And then the bottom up is we take these business processes and we identify what those good use cases are for AI. Eventually, when you've daisy chained all of your business processes with AI enablement, now you have an AI and forward-thinking organization around the AI use. So we get some clients come to us going, we have this problem that we want to solve with AI. And then we get other clients that say, well, we want to roll out AI across the organization and all the users. So there's always two types of projects that we work with. Okay, but this is the daisy chain of all the little bits of processes. So we're going to try and cover that today. Okay, so the opportunity for us we don't really see that a business shouldn't really be looking at AI projects as such. Sometimes it is just looking at what your messy processes are. So quite often we'll say, what's the biggest headaches or bottlenecks within your organization? Usually that comes down to things like unstructured information. So that's kind of like document chaos or, there's just sprawl of information and people don't really know how to build some improvements on that process. So unstructured information is probably the hardest thing to kind of resolve because you're having to relook at your entire information stack. But that's where a lot of businesses are these days. So the other opportunity really is just looking at those repetitive decisions. So to implement an AI project, you want to look at the things that have high scale. So it's the things that you do consistently all of the time. So you have a formalized process and it gets followed every single time. Where that used to be for us an automation project, so we would say, well, we could automate that process. If you do the same process every single time, we can automate it. Where AI now has some leverage, it's where you have the curly bits, right? So you could have it that maybe not every time you do this, or AI actually has to lay some reasoning over it. So when we were in automation, we were saying, well, if the value is this, then do this. And if the value is something else, then do something else. But with AI, we could say, well, you figure out what the value is and you do the next action, right? So AI has really changed the way we do automation. So every AI project kind of is automation, but not every automation is an AI project. The other thing is inconsistent handling. I think a lot of businesses, there's a lot of inconsistencies, and we call this operational maturity. So a lot of businesses, especially across New Zealand and Australia that we come across, the kind of small to mid-sized businesses, a lot of the processes are in people's heads. And you're like, well, we do it that way because that's the way we've always done it. Sue knows how to do it. Jim knows how to do it. That's just the way it's done. What we need to do to increase that maturity is to actually identify what our business processes are and then have consistency of the way that we deliver those. And then we have the opportunity to start to leverage some AI and automation on top of that. So that's one of those gotchas that we quite often see. So if you don't have that, that's the first place to start. Is like, well, let's actually figure out what our process is before we start to work out how we can automate it. The other thing we see is the knowledge is trapped in people's heads. So, if you've ever had it where a staff member's left the organization and you're like, oh my gosh, that's disastrous because that person knew how to do everything. And then you scramble for the last couple of weeks to get them to write things down. And then they go into a book and then a new person starts and never reads the book. So that's it. And I think AI can really help with that process, right? To figure out what it is that people do, produce kind of SOPs and things like that, right? So I think that's a really good use case for AI. And then just general reporting. So analysis with AI is a huge opportunity. So being able to probe some data and just say, well, let's make some decisions around this. So I think that's a cool opportunity. And then obviously more on the automation side, but AI can integrate into different systems. So if you add a user into your CRM, but you also have to add them into your Zero, then you could use AI to do that. So, integrating into different systems is cool opportunities. So generally we try and look for where the information is a little bit chaotic, and then we can start to streamline those processes. All right. So that's the kind of foundations of the opportunities. So we're going to talk about project number one. So I'm talking about a complaints handling agent, but this really could be any business process, right? So just think outside the box a little bit here. So if you think about complaints, now you might have, in this example, we're imagining that it's like a franchise. So you have a head office, but you also have stores, but you might not be that big. So it would be a slightly smaller scale. But the thing is with complaints is you have a mix of structured and unstructured data. So a structured data would be things like online forms or app submissions and things like that, because you're actually asking a client to fill in the boxes, and the output of those boxes, we know exactly how it's going to come through. And so then that's more of an automation process. We know that they've ticked the tick box, and we know that we follow the process. Whereas emails, phone calls, physical cards in the reception area and things like that, not structured at all. So anyone can say anything in an email. And this is where AI can actually interpret that information and run the structured process on it. Okay, so data comes in from many channels. In this scenario, you have a head office, but you also have the individual stores. So head office have their own complaints coming through about the stores, and the stores have their own complaints as well, whether head office know about them or not. But yeah, so imagine that's the scenario. Okay, so what we did is we run an agent that actually captures from all of those sources. So we give it access into one of the mailboxes. So you have a complaints mailbox, or you have a store email box or something like that. We also have, if someone can scan and capture the physical cards, then we can drop that into a folder and they will get saved in one location. We can have our web forms and our app forms that push through the data into a centralized location. So the AI then captures all of that. It's called AI Builder, which I think actually Microsoft have just rebranded. Microsoft are great at rebranding things every time I do a slide deck. But they've rebranded it now to Copilot Credits, but it was AI Builder. Then what we do is we ask the AI to extract the data. And the extracted data down here is which is the stores, what's the type of complaint. So if you think about, let's take a fast food chain. So the types of complaints could be whether it's drive-through or just general customer service, or whether it's cleanliness, whether it's the food preparation or delivery if you're using Uber and things like that, right? So there could be different types of complaints, and we're using AI to identify what they are from the unstructured data. What's the time and the date of the complaint, the severity of the complaint, the customer's details, and then what the required follow-up is, right? So that's the extracted data, and we can put that into a table. Then we've obviously using that to categorize the complaint area, and then we're routing it to a store manager. So we know who the store manager is. They may say, XYZ store in the complaint. Otherwise, we have to try and use some reasoning. So sometimes they might say something that gives us some clues. Otherwise, it's blank. And when it's blank, we can route it through a different process. So if the AI doesn't identify who the store manager is or what the store is, we can route it through someone else who then has to make that judgment call. So we put that human in the process. So we route it to the store manager, but we actually build a suggested response. So that suggested response is actually basically gives the store manager a click response back to that customer. If they don't use the suggested response, then they would write something else. But what we want to do then is capture what response they did actually give. And then that agent actually becomes kind of a self-perpetuating learning circle. So if it suggested a response and you didn't use it and you wrote something else, train it back on next time, suggest this response instead. So then you've got we're recording the complaint data, and then we actually push all of this through Teams. So it's like a conversation through Teams. So we notify the store manager in Teams, ask them to respond. And then they have to send like credits to customers and stuff like that. So the value is not really just the suggested response. Now they actually have captured data. So when you have that database, you can then start to build some metrics and things like that on there. Otherwise, you have emails, you've got documents, you've got forms that are submitted. So we're actually creating that structure that we can actually leverage for other reasons. Okay, so that's project one. But there's lots of scenarios for that. So if you think even like health and safety, right? So we could build a health and safety agent that has a very similar process. There's all sorts of business processes, but it's like a funnel. So you start off with all of this unstructured data and you funnel it through the AI to give you a structured output, which is exactly what the next slide says. Okay, so turn the unstructured chaos into structured workflow. So yeah, I'm not going to read it out. You guys can see all that. But yeah, that's essentially that. Funneling it down a process and then getting the data out of it. And I think the important thing that a lot of people miss is this exception handling. So there's still going to be things. You may have heard like AI with hallucination, where if it doesn't know the answer, it just tries to make it up. So you have to put what's called guardrails on the AI. And you say, like, do not make it up. If you don't know the answer, follow this other process. Right? So then you route it down a different pathway. So that's quite an important part of that process. Okay, project number 2. So knowledge retention is a problem for all organizations. So let's say you're an engineering firm and one of your lead engineers leaves the organization and they had all of this knowledge that leaves with them. So that might be emails that are in their inbox. It might be documents in their OneDrive. It could be conversations they've had in Teams. There's lots of places where that lead engineer held that critical knowledge. And when they leave the organization, it essentially walks out the door with them. Now, you may have a process to do something with that, like archiving that off or pulling the data out of their mailbox. I know some IT companies share that mailbox with the next staff member. I don't necessarily like that idea because, how many times do you do that? Does it get shared with the third staff member or do they just get the second staff member? I don't know. But what we actually ended up building is a knowledge agent on that person. So when they left the organization, we build a centralized repository and we start to train an agent on that knowledge. So let's jump into that. So how that knowledge agent works is we actually grab all of that data. So mailbox data, documents, we put them into a SharePoint library and that SharePoint library becomes that knowledge source. And then we build an agent on top of it. Now, the agent, we actually run it through a bit of a cleanup agent phase first, because we don't need to know what that person had for lunch last Friday. We only really want to know what they talked about with clients and the products that they developed. So we run it through a cleanup phase first and extract out then only the relevant emails and documents. So we do that through some categorization process. And then we use that then to build the structured knowledge base. And then we build an agent that's grounded on that knowledge. And that gives you the ability to ask any questions in natural language. So, what did XYZ say about this site? What was the original design decisions? What happened to this client, or has this issue happened before? And what should we check first? So it actually becomes a person that no longer exists in the company that you can now have conversations about, and actually uses all of the knowledge of that person. So we used to call it ghosting, because you've now created a ghost that you could talk to. No Ouija boards, but you can actually talk to these people that are no longer in your organization and try and get some of those responses. So it's a pretty cool process. Now, I think what I like about it is there's not just when someone leaves the organization. Actually, knowledge retention is a problem across the entire organization anyway, because they might just be sick, they might be at lunch. It might just be that you want to train other staff members on what that person would say without them being in the room. So there's, we all use the example of retiring technical staff, but you also have departing founders. Now, for me, that's a really interesting one, because if you're a business owner and you're looking to sell your company, then really you're only going to get investment in your company if you could hand it over to the next owners of the business. If all of the knowledge is in your head, it's going to be very difficult to hand that over. So the departing founders, I think, is a really important one. And so if we could start to capture that knowledge now, train an agent on that, and then there's a bit of legacy there after you leave, right? Then you've got things just like you can have individual knowledge agents just on individual projects. So for this type of project or this product, so let's say you developed a product, you can create an agent just with all the knowledge about that product, its warranties and all things like that. So you can have project and product handovers. And then some other examples as well there, right? So you can have client-specific ones. So you have a long-term client, you can create an agent just on the knowledge on that one client. So if anyone then takes over and has to support that client, then the whole team have the shared knowledge, right? So I think that's a really cool use case for some AI. And down here, key message: the business can you can build this before the person leaves. You don't have to wait till after they've left. So you should actually be capturing some of that data every day anyway. Which actually brings me to the third project, which is what we call delivery intelligence. So in that project two, that was just one single person's data, and that might grow as you start to capture other people's data and bring it into a centralized repository. But what we have here is the concept of taking just data across your entire organization. Now, this is an interesting one because for years we have been talking about with SharePoint is this whole concept of single source of truth. And in the single source of truth, we say, well, you should only ever have one document, one copy of the document. And if you're going to share that copy of the document, you create a sharing link. Everyone's linking back to the original document and things like that. So we've always said single source of truth. The way things are heading with this AI is I can see that actually we might end up having two sources of truth. One is the human one that's in your file structure, and the other one is a knowledge repository for your AI agents. And so you could say, well, that was a very good example of the perfect document. We'll put that in and train up the AI agent. So you may end up with two separate repositories, one with it even potentially doesn't even have human access to it. It's just the perfect knowledge base for your organization. You may have already seen it when you're using Copilot, that you ask it something and it does a kind of a broad search. And sometimes you're like, oh, well, that's not quite what I want. And you end up having to ask it again and again to try and get the response that you're after. If you can narrow the scope of what Copilot's responding back with, and you can train an agent to say, well, for this, let's say a project management agent, and you say, I just want to run it on the knowledge about our projects, then you'd have that narrow scope of data. So I think that's what we're trying to achieve here. So deliver intelligence. So imagine in your organization, you have emails, documents, you've got all of your team's conversations, transcriptions, and things like that. You've got all of your meeting notes, maybe some whiteboards and things like that as well. You might have any projects tools. Now, this could be inside Microsoft or outside Microsoft, but you'd have to connect it up through MCPs. Any support tickets or anything related to the services that you have. You might have some SharePoint lists. And you might have some client conversations that might sit in Teams channels or elsewhere. What we want to do is try and consolidate all of the data into a single location, or it might be multiple locations depending on the use cases. But let's say in this scenario, we're going to put them all into one single site, and that becomes the raw delivery that we train agents on. So what that looks like is we now capture all of that data, and we call that a level one. So this is the 3-tier knowledge model. Level one is raw data. So we're just capturing everything that's happened across the organization. So all of the emails, any files, tickets, any notes, Teams transcripts are probably your biggest resource to leverage, because you're having open conversations. Your clients have got some questions and answers and things like that. So for anyone who's had meetings with us, we're quite particular on us hosting those meetings so that we can capture that data and pop it into our knowledge base. And on that note, slight tangent, we might start looking at alternatives like third-party ones, because it annoys me that I can't join someone else's Teams meeting and run the same knowledge capture. So we might look at third-party tools to handle that, which is a bit of a shame because I quite like Teams and Copilot. But anyway, that's another conversation. So right, raw data, capturing everything, putting it into a knowledge base. Then what we do is we run layer 2, which is what we call interpreted knowledge. Now, the interpreted knowledge, if you actually just use raw data and you start asking Copilot to answer questions based on the raw data, it could be a bit hit and miss. Right. So what we actually want to do is interpret that. So we want to run through all of our emails and Teams transcripts and start to produce some categories and some summaries. So and I can actually show you an example of this as well. But through that, we actually have identified knowledge. In fact, I'll bring that up because it's maybe a bit easier to show. So here's a library here, right? So raw evidence is all of our workshop transcripts go into raw evidence. And then our layer 2, interpreted knowledge. What we have here is the ability to have all knowledge across all of those conversations. If you think, if we meet lots of clients, we're having lots of workshops with them, different organizations, different size organizations, different industries and things like that. So we just want to capture all of that knowledge. So we have one agent that just crawls all of our transcripts and extracts out all knowledge into one single repository. We have another agent that crawls it and actually extracts out any architecture decisions. So when we talk to one organization about their SharePoint site structure, why is that different to another organization's site structure? So we can start to capture those architecture decisions. The other thing is we have another agent that crawls it and extracts out our client Q&As. So we call them signals. But when a client asks a question, what did we respond and how can we capture that? Which means eventually we can start to generate better responses, right? So, and more consistency across our team. Because I think sometimes if you ask me something, you might get a different response as if you ask Anna Marika something, because we will have some slightly different experiences within SharePoint, right? So client Q&A signals, we are capturing in that layer 2. And then the project retrospectives is where we have internal meetings about the projects that we've run, and then we can start to capture things like lessons learned and things that didn't go so well, right? So we put those into that project retrospectives and the things that did go well. And so we can start to map the data between the two. So we made this architectural decision and it went really well for this industry. And so that's the layer 2 interpreted knowledge. And then jumping back here. So that's that layer 2. Basically explain what that means. So we've got raw data, run an agent to summarize it and explain it, build some categories and things like that. Then what we then do, which I think is the most exciting part, is actually creating promoted insights. So layer 3 is another agent layer on top of that interpreted knowledge. So if you think about what we've got there with our client Q&As, so every single question that's asked by a client and the response, if you imagine what we can now start producing with that around social media posts. So we can actually start to, or even like user training documentations in 1 pages. We just say, well, go through every single Teams training that we've ever done, capture all the client's questions, produce an FAQ, and that's now our Teams 1-pager for FAQs. We could then take that and say, okay, we're going to do a LinkedIn post, common questions that are asked about Teams or Copilot and things like that. So we have the knowledge, that's the interpreted knowledge layer. Now, what are we going to do with it? The other idea is, like, we're obviously capturing all of our project data now. At the end of a project, we could write testimonials, we can write case studies, and we can get Copilot agents to actually write those based on the knowledge that we have in that interpreted knowledge layer. So that's a cool opportunity. The other thing is we can get it to write our SOPs, our procedure manuals. We'll just be like, every time we do this, we follow this same process, and we can get it to write our documentation for us. We can also use it for onboarding new staff, and you could say, okay, well, when you onboard, if you run this type of project, then use an agent to extract out what the process is for that type of project, right? So that's that 3 layers to those insights. So to me, that's the correct way to start building it. I think giving people free reign with Copilot over all of your data, sometimes a bit hit and miss. By creating those 3 layers, the data gets cleaned, and then you get really good outcomes from that. So I think that's pretty cool. So don't jump from raw data to executive insights, build the knowledge layer first. So that's interpretation. Okay. Right. So a simple framework for any AI project is first find your messy processes. Then we're going to map the sources of all that information. So where is it? It might be distributed across several teams or SharePoint libraries. Does it need to be restructured into a new space, or can we use where it is? Then you need to decide how that's going to be structured best for the AI. Then we add AI reasoning. So that's that second layer. So add AI reasoning where it's useful to do so. Or you're going to keep deterministic automation. So that means that you're going to have a very structured input and output. So where we can keep it structured, you're going to get better outcomes. The AI reasonings where you get the kind of variance potential. Then you're going to capture the output in a system as well. So you say, okay, well, this was a good output or a bad output, and you could use that to start training the models, because you could say, well, that was terrible, and it's all about retraining, which is actually also in point 8 about the improving. So actually having these are never going to be perfect first time, but the more you use it, the better it's going to get. And then the other thing is number 7 is report on a business impact. So, it's all well and good saying, okay, well, we've saved, we saved 30 minutes of time by running that AI agent, and you multiply that out. But a lot of people don't do that. So, and then they forget actually the change that AI has made on their business. So never forget that, especially with things where Copilot's now got these costs associated with it. So quite often, we're getting it now where people are saying, oh, it's costing me $12 to run that Copilot co-work process. But the reality is you were paying a lot more than that beforehand. So yeah, tracking the ROI, I think, is quite important. Okay, so final takeaways. Look for information chaos, preserving your business knowledge, turning in your structured workflows. I think that's the biggest mistake I see is people still trying to automate bad processes. Actually, we want to maybe change the process and then automate that rather than just trying to automate bad processes. Okay, right. Now, I just wanted to talk, I know I've only got a couple of minutes. Feel free to jump off if you are tight on time. But I just want to talk about why AI implementations sometimes fail. What we see is sometimes there's just a lot of confusion. So people don't really know where to get started with AI. The second thing is that people have old habits. So it's very easy to get the idea and be like, okay, well, that's really cool, but I'm just busy. I'm just going to carry on answering my emails, right? So old habits is something we have to break. And then sometimes there's culture chaos within an organization. So you might have some people that have zero use of AI, and you have some people that are, they're leading the pack in your organization and doing a heap of stuff with AI. So what we want to do is try and leverage the people that are excelling with AI to pull up the people that are not doing anything with AI, right? So the way we do that is we actually provide some clarity. So that's where that user enablement, some user training and things like that come in. So provide some clarity. The old habits, we break that really with continued learning. I think giving someone a single training session doesn't work. They go back to their old habits the day after the training session, and the utilization, because we can record this on metrics, right? Utilization spikes on the day of the training, and then it slowly just declines back to zero. So continued learning is the answer to that one. And then for culture chaos, you really have to approach this from an organizational wide change, right? So this isn't just give people licenses and let them figure it out. It's actually about coming up with some strategies of how to roll that out. And this is where we come to, you may have seen our communications about it, but we have our community. So this is where we're heading. So this is our confidence concept. It is just concept at this stage, and we're starting very much on the left-hand side and working our way to the right. But we've got the Copilot Kickstart, which is kind of like our free discovery session, which for those that didn't know, we have one discovery on the 5th of August and one on the 19th of August, and they are free. So that is just to get started with Copilot. If you don't know what Copilot is, then join those sessions, and that's how to get started. And we'll give you a walkthrough, where to find it and how to use it and what the buttons will do. Okay, then we have our confidence sprint. So the confidence is actually getting people using it. So the Kickstart is understanding what it is, and the confidence sprint is getting people to use it. So that's how to use it in your emails, in Teams, in Excel, and things like that. So we're going to be running specific use cases for how to actually use Copilot to improve your email processes. Then we got Prompt Paradise, which is the ability to actually learn how to do better prompting to get better results. So that's going to give you clarity. By the end of those areas, you're going to have real clarity on how to use Copilot. And then you can go away and start doing it for yourself, which, so we call that Copilot and see. So that's our first level. If you don't know what it is, you get to see what it is and start using it. Then we've got for the continued learning. So really what we want to do is try and identify where you can save time. So we call that the time finder stage. And what you need to do is identify those opportunities within your day-to-day work that's going to help you save time. And our goal is to save, let's say 5 hours a week of time for every person in your organization that has Copilot, right? So we want to find those opportunities. Then it's about habit stacking. So, it might be a slow road to build those habits, but you do one thing and you do another thing. And then it actually becomes really addictive because you now start to think about Copilot being the first thing you do rather than the afterthought. So habit stacking is really important. And then you actually start to look at your own personal workflow wins. So, when you get the same email multiple times and you're having to respond back, then start to use AI to automatically do those responses and things like that, right? So the workflow wins from personal workflows is the end of that continued learning. And we call that Copilot and Me. So now you are very capable within Copilot and you are becoming quite efficient in the process of using Copilot, right? So that's that layer. And then when we start looking at organizational wide deployment of Copilot. So what we want to do is encourage someone in the organization to be a Copilot champion. At the moment, it seems to be 2 or 3 within a 20 or 30 user organization that really take the lead with the AI rollouts. So that Copilot champion, identifying who they are and kind of promoting them up into that seat where they start to lead and kind of push the whole organization along. Then we've got the Copilot Council. So for larger organizations, it's really just knowing what the risks are with Copilot. So understanding within your organization who's going to make those decisions and what can and can't be used within AI. I'm using Copilot and AI kind of intermixed here, but if you're Microsoft stack, it will be Copilot, but you might use things like Claude or ChatGPT. So I suggest you put together a council and we can help you with that framework. And then implementing a Copilot club within your organization. So this is where you all support each other. You come up with your ideas of wins and challenges, things that haven't gone so well, and you start to promote it in things like your team meetings. You might have a Teams channel and things like that where you start to promote. So we can help you through that process as well. So that fixes that culture chaos. And we call that Copilot and We. So Copilot and C is how to get started and see what Copilot can do. Copilot and Me is how I can use Copilot. Copilot and We is, as an organization, how we're going to start to leverage it. Okay, so it's about finding those repetitive processes, not just for me, but for everyone in my team and then across the whole organization. Okay, so that's our concept, and we are currently in this space here, right? So we've got our confidence sprint coming up. On that note, I'll just flick to the next slide. So we've got this launch, that's the Kickstarter, so that's free, so you should join that 5th and the 19th of August, and I'll share the link to that afterwards. Joe will send out the recording and all of the links. The Copilot Confidence, so this is per user, but let us know if you want to bring the whole organization along and we can look at kind of corporate pricing for that one. But the Copilot Confidence, that starts next week as well. So the first intake for that, and we've nearly sold out. So you want to get in quick for that one if you're interested in that one, because we don't know when we're going to be running that again. But then really that's the intake before you join the community, right? So the confidence is to get you up to speed and the community is to keep you at speed. So that's the Copilot community. And for anyone who joined this webinar, we're running a promo on that until the end of August. So $29 for life. So long as you sign up before August, you get access to the community. And for as long as you stay in the community, it will just be $29. That is New Zealand dollars. Yeah, I think. And then the Copilot Champion, like I said, that's something for the future. So we're just taking applications. So if you think you're the champion within your organization, let us know and we can put you on that wait list. And we'll, once we've got enough numbers, then we'll run that champion program across those organizations. Okay. That was a very, very quick run through. And was there any questions? You're on mute, Anna-Marika.
Yes, we do have some questions. I know we're a bit over time. So for those that are able to stay to get the answers to those questions, hang on in and we'll get those answered. The first question that we had was a medical related question, Ian. Do you have any suggestions for protecting patient medical data if we use an agent on an email that deals with a lot of medical information?
Yes. So technically, within the Copilot space, you've got your green shield, which is your enterprise data protection. So technically, anything within your Microsoft environment is protected by that shield. But it's something you always have to be careful of. Like if we ever try and capture medical data, we try and anonymize it. But yeah, have you got anything else to add to that, Anna-Marika?
I would also add that you do want to be careful putting medical data into emails. It's perhaps not the best place to be sharing medical data unless it's incoming from a patient. So just being careful in that space.
I think the general nature of the way lots of clinics work, though, is like they do have comms going through emails. I think that's where the patient portals usually are the kind of best practice for sharing that data, because then they're logging in rather than it being sent. I have seen GP clinics that are sending to personal Gmail accounts, which I think is the worst case scenario. At least keeping it within the Microsoft stack, you have the ability to put some of those controls in place. I don't really want to go down the purview pathway, but there are things you could do to identify medical data through like NHI numbers and things like that. And you could say, well, they can't. You could put some kind of approval policies on those emails. But yeah, it gets tricky because you don't want to restrict it, because actually that's how you communicate. So you can't disable it, but you can alert on it. So yeah, very tricky. AI in that space is a bit of a can of worms, but I think Copilot is the leader in the security side and keeping it all within that Microsoft bubble. As soon as you start opening it up, and this is that shadow AI, right? So you'll see it quite often that you'll find that people are probably already uploading things into ChatGPT if they don't already have Copilot licenses, and that's where the risk is. It's not so much on whether Copilot is reading those emails or not. It's what are people uploading into your AI tools.
All very important stuff. We have another question around one of the solutions that you talked through, and that was, you mentioned manually written cards for complaints. How are you capturing this, and can AI natively OCR, or do you need to use a separate tool?
Yeah, so that's actually the most unreliable part of the process. So it can actually read handwritten text, but when you actually run an AI agent through data, it actually gives you a confidence score, and we only accept things above 95% confidence. If it has a low confidence score, we actually reject it and put it through a human process. For the handwritten cards, what we actually recommend doing is, I know it's a little bit annoying, but to get the most reliable outcomes is you actually get someone to put it into the digital forms, and then you know that it's being processed in the same way. So what you could do is actually run it through. If it picks it up with a high confidence, process it. If it fails, put it through to someone else, and they have to submit it through the more structured process like a form.
And the lucky last question is more logistics, which you have alluded to, and that was, we've got someone asking, where is the link for the champion option? So you're sending through information on that later on.
Yep, yeah, we'll send you through that. If you happen to be on a browser, you could go to our website, and then just across the top, there's a Copilot community button. You click that, and it's got the 4 options, and you can jump into either of those 4. But yeah, but we'll send an email out anyway.
That's it.
Okay, brilliant. Well, there was a 4th project, but I had to narrow it down for this small window. But yeah, we probably run this again, or if you join the community, we can run through the reporting and analysis agent to actually structure reports to be able to send out to clients and things like that. Quite a cool little process. But yeah, we'll cover that on a second session. So keep an eye out. We actually don't have a topic for the next one. So if anyone's got anything that they want us to talk about, anything that's pressing, I think it's been a while since we've done things around Teams and SharePoint, so we might touch on that. Otherwise, we could do forms or planner, something a bit different. Yeah, I don't know. Let us know. Send me an email if you want us to pick up a topic. Okay. Well, thanks very much for your support, Anna Marika. Thanks for running through those questions. And yeah, reach out if you need any help with anything, just reach out. You got my email.
Thank you everyone for coming along. We'll see you at the next session.
Thank you. See ya.